The city creates a policy. That's a product of public participation as well. They have had a number of policies. They had one in 2003, which lasted for quite a few years. Then one in 2014. The most recent one is 2018. The policies have addressed road closures quite well. We've been involved in negotiating with the city on those and highlighting some of the problems of previous policies. The current policy is the most road closure friendly of all of them. It's not without its problems, but it works fairly well. And the process that's run by the city is actually working as well, quite well. One of the few departments in the city that generally does their job. Right now, the city is doing an audit of road closures. There are approximately 450 road closures in the city of Johannesburg. Many of them are illegal. And the city's done an audit and at the moment is delivering letters to those road closures that are illegal, giving them 30 days to rectify their road closures, failing which they're going to take their structures down. We're actually very busy at the moment dealing with many of those. How do you become illegal? You get your approval and you've got to reapply after 2 years. Many people don't reapply. They do their application and they just hide under the radar and hope nobody notices. And for many years, the city hasn't been doing anything about it. They are now. I mentioned this because it affects how long it takes to get a road closure through at the moment. So let me talk to you about the process to get a road closure in terms of the current policy of the city of Johannesburg. The first thing that you have to have is you have to have the support of 2/3 of the people living and or working in the area that you're proposing to enclose. I can answer some questions on that because there's issues around what constitutes 2/3, but I'll come back to that if anybody wants that kind of detail. The second thing that you need to do is you need to show you're not going to cause traffic chaos if you do a road closure. And in order to address that, you have to have traffic engineers report. And that traffic engineer will put cameras up at every intersection, and he will look and see, or she will look to see which roads are how busy are the roads, where's the traffic coming from, where's it going to, and based on that, be able to tell you which roads can be closed and which can't. Now, when I say closed, you have to have access into your suburb 24 hours a day, at least one of your entrances, because these remain public roads. And when you're looking at road closures, you're actually looking at two constitutional issues, which makes it quite complicated. First one is the issue of safety and security, which is a constitutional right we all have. And that's the reason why the legislation was created, for safety and security purposes. But against that, you've also got the constitutional right to freedom of movement. And because these are public roads, you may not deny anybody access into your area. So we're talking about, we call it a road closure. The correct name for it is access restriction. Restriction means you restrict access, you don't deny access. So there must be at least one entrance that anybody can come in at any time of the day or night. What makes road closures effective in reducing crime is that where you have a suburb such as yours with, say, 11 entrances, if you can reduce that to 2 or 3 entrances, depending on what the traffic engineer says, a criminal who's got to come into your area is going to have to think twice about it, because when he comes into that area, he's being watched. Either there's a guard there or there's a camera or something. So he knows when I go in, it's going to be a record of me having come into this area. If I commit a crime inside the area and it gets reported while I'm inside, there is the possibility that I won't be able to get out because the gates will close, the booms will close, I'll get trapped inside. So what does he do? He will go to an area where he can get in and out without anybody observing him, without having to be concerned about being captured inside the area. So road closures do work. Of the road closures that exist, that are receiving the letters, every single one of them, when they phone me, tells me we've got to keep our road closure. They give you, they'll recount to you what life was like before they had the road closure, what it's like afterwards. It works. Obviously, it's got to be run efficiently, it's got to be run properly, and it needs the support of residents. I'm going to tie into something that was said earlier, because this is a community initiative. And if you don't, you as a community don't get involved, if you don't contribute, if you don't support your committee, it's not going to work. There are incidents of road closures that have failed, particularly bigger ones, where people say, somebody else is paying, I'm not going to pay. And eventually it becomes too expensive for the small group of people that are paying, and the road closure falls apart. So it's very important that this is a community initiative, that it has your support. So you need the support of 2/3 of the people living and working in the area. You need a traffic impact study. When you've done that, then you need to submit an application to the city. It's a written application, there's an application form, there's various other minor technicalities which have to be complied with to show the city that you have done your homework, you've got the requisite support, you're not going to create traffic problems. That application then gets submitted to the city. They then distribute it to all the internal departments for comments. So they send it to the emergency services, they send it to the traffic department, they send it to town planning. Every department gets asked to comment. Once they've got that, and that normally takes a couple of months, they then call you to a meeting. It's called a Section 45 meeting. It's that section of the Act where they're going to discuss your road closure application with you. They've gone through it and they come to you with queries, problems that they might have. You make a presentation of your road closure application to them, and they're generally quite reasonable. There's certain things I fight with them about. It's fine-tuning rather than the actual road closure. So all of our road closures have been approved. Sometimes with conditions we don't like, or residents don't like, which I can tell you about a bit later. But generally speaking, road closures go through if they've been done properly, and if you can show you've done your homework, you've got your support, you're not going to cause traffic, and you're going to obey the rules. Okay, so you have that meeting. There's a committee that you appear before. That committee then sends a recommendation to the decision maker, who is the MEC for, I think it's the MEC for transport. It's the lady by the name of Dorothy Mabuza. She basically rubber stamps what has been decided. And then you get a letter to say, in principle, your road closure application has been approved. At that stage, you have to advertise the road closure to allow for public participation, again, to meet the requirements of the Constitution for public participation. So that advert has to appear. You have to put a sign up at every intersection where you're going to have the closure structures. You have to advertise it in the local newspaper and in the Provincial Gazette. And anybody can comment and lodge objections. They have 30 days from the date when the advert first appeared to lodge objections. If objections are lodged, the city will send you the objections and give you the opportunity to respond to those objections. And then they'll make a final decision. If there are no objections, then 30 days after the advert has appeared, the city will write you a letter and say you now have final approval. You then have to re-advertise the final approval in the Government Gazette. And once that's been done, you can put your structures up, and you have a 2-year time period before you have to submit a re-application. The re-application, you go through the same process. It's slightly less complicated and less expensive in terms of the costs, but it's effectively the same process. In terms of the 2018 policy, for the first time, the city says at the end of your 2-year time period, if you've obeyed all of our rules and you've done everything that we've asked you to do, then we'll give you a 4-year approval. At the end of that 4-year period, if again you've obeyed all of our rules, then we'll give you a 6-year time period. But the first time that you apply, you will only get a 2-year time period for approval. Okay, that's what we call phase 1 of your road closure application. Phase 2 is the construction phase. That's when you put your structures up. And then phase 3 is when you're now running your road closure. You've got to have enough money coming in to make sure that you cover the costs of security, to cover the costs of maintaining the structures, and to cover the costs of employing someone like myself to submit your application. Right. I don't know if you want me to go through the models or how much it costs. Do I need to go into that kind of detail today, or you don't think? Some other time. Okay, so I won't go into that. So, but effectively, you've got the 3 different phases. We recommend that you create a non-profit company if you don't already have one. I don't know if you do, but if you do, it can be utilized to collect the money. Because one of the problems that you have in road closures is the city won't allow you to force people to pay. So it's voluntary. And the problem is this. When it's voluntary, you first of all get a number of freeloaders, people who are quite happy to ride on everyone else's backs and not pay. They'll give you a million reasons why they're not paying, but they don't. And you're going to have that in every road closure, there's a certain percentage. Then you get some people who can't afford to pay. And those you have to talk to them and make reasonable compromise. And then you get the person who decides, you know what, I think I actually want to buy a Porsche. So I'm paying my levies, but I'm not going to stop paying so that I can go and buy myself a Porsche. And somebody else can pay for me. It's not a problem. Then there's the guys who say that the committee member didn't say hello to me in the spa, so I'm now not going to pay. I kid you not. These are the reasons that people give for not paying. So part of what we do and part of our expertise, how we get involved, is we know all the problems. So from the perspective of Suburban Solutions, we can run your road closure for you. We can not run it. We can apply on your behalf. All that we require from you once you give us a mandate, we'll send you the forms that need to be signed. You get them signed. When you've got the 2/3 support, you give them to us, and then we run with your road closure application. Yeah. Time periods. In the normal course of things, a road closure from the date when we submit the application, and I'm saying from the date when we submit it, because getting the 2/3 support can take a very long period of time. From the date when you submit your application, it normally takes about 8 months for you to get a final approval of your road closure. That's assuming you don't have objections and assuming you're not unhappy with some of the conditions that the city wants to impose, which means 8 months after we've submitted the application, you can put your structures up. That's pretty quick. So you then have to get the money together to pay for phase 1, and then make sure you've got the money together for phase 2 to pay for the construction of the structures. How much that costs depends entirely on what you're looking for. There are road closures that we do in suburbs like Hyde Park, where they want double booms and they have number plate recognition cameras, and they have roving guards, and they have brick structures for their guardhouse, and it all looks very fancy, and that costs a great deal of money. And we have road closures, which are not necessarily less effective, which do the basics. And it costs, the least I've heard is about 300 Rand a month for your road closure. That's what it costs you to keep it running. Give you some idea. There are areas that are paying 1,900 Rands, more expensive ones that like all the bells and whistles. How you do it, what you do is entirely up to you as a community, and what your budget will allow, what you believe you need, but it isn't less effective to be paying the small amount of money. There are a number of other benefits to road closures, which I'm going to mention. And the first one is you develop a sense of community. And I think that has already been mentioned. But what I've seen in road closures, big or small, is that when you have to get the 2/3 support, suddenly you have to reach out to neighbors that you've all spoken to before. Everybody lives today behind high walls with a panic button. You don't speak to your neighbors. You drive out your driveway with your windows closed. That starts to change when you start to get together to build something like a road closure. We have many areas which had a piece of felt, which is actually part of city parks, but nobody uses it. It's not safe. When the road closure is created, the residents take control of that, and they turn it into a park that it's meant to be. And it's so gratifying to see kids playing in those parks and ground being used for what it's supposed to be used for. So that's one of the benefits, is community. There's another benefit to community. You have power as a community, and residents don't seem to realize that. When you stand together as a community, you have political power, you have economic power. With most of the road closures that we deal with, once the decision is taken to make the road closure, they approach security companies, for instance, and say, what we would like is for you to give us a proposal. If we can get, say, 2/3 of the people to join up with you as a security company, give us a better deal. And security companies are very open to doing that, because the more people they've got, as was also mentioned earlier, the cheaper it can be per household, the more effective they can be, the more vehicles they can provide to you. They can also man your structures if you want guards at your booms. Now, it's another thing. In terms of the new policy, you don't have to have a 24-hour guard at your booms. That's major, because until then, the city insisted before 2018, you had to have a guard at your boom. Now, the guards have to be serial registered, and the average cost of a guard at a 24-hour manned boom is 30,000 Rands. That's a lot of money. Now that they're allowing something called automation, it's been a game changer for road closures, and that's something that you could look at. Bearing in mind, if you go for automation, it's more expensive to install, but from an ongoing running perspective, it's a whole lot cheaper. But you need to work with your security company. You need to sign up with your security companies. You need to give them your loyalty so that they can then, in turn, develop a business model that can work for them, that's cost effective for them, but also gives you maximum traction in terms of improving your safety and security. Very important. We are talking to an insurance company at the moment for one of our road closures. The insurance companies are very keen to move into boomed areas because the crime goes down. They know that. They've done their research. So for them, it's a win-win situation. If you go to them and you say, right, we're about to boom our suburb, can you give us reductions in our short-term insurance because we're now going to be in a boomed area? And what the one security company's done already in one of our areas, they said, yes, we'll relook at your insurance. Obviously, it's dependent on individuals, but in general, they can give you a reduction in your premiums. They also, in this particular case, give a percentage of your premium back to your road closure committee to be utilized towards your community. And in that community, they've built speed humps. They've got improved road signs, got more cameras. There's all sorts of things you can do. So don't underestimate the power of community. What I've seen, and I'm going to come to your road closure in a minute, is that you've already started along. So you're also well on your way, and in fact, further than many road closures that I've read in terms of putting this road closure together. Another advantage that you'll find is that your property prices will increase. We did a road closure in Nelspruit. It was a fairly small one, and Nelspruit knew nothing about road closures before I got there. So there was no preconceived ideas. Most people in Joburg know about road closures. So when we did it, they did their booming, and then I spoke to an estate agent who didn't know anything about road closures a couple of months later and said, tell me, what effect has there been on property prices? I said, well, initially, the first thing that happens is houses sell much more quickly. It didn't increase the property prices, but houses sell more quickly. As the people realize the crime has actually come down, the property prices start to increase. And what we find in the road closures is that people look to buy into a road closure in Johannesburg in particular. And then they're willing to pay more. And they're generally happy to pay the premium, the levy that needs to be paid, because they recognize the benefit that it has. We've done in some areas what we call a mock closure. That's where we're not getting people to come to the party. We say to the security company, let's put up temporary booms one morning, usually on a Saturday morning, even if it's just a code in the road. Every car that drives up, you stop them, and you have members of your committee there and say, if you signed up for the road closure. People are surprised when they stop. Then you explain it to them. You catch a lot of people who don't read WhatsApps, don't join groups, don't read the newspaper, don't come to meetings, but they suddenly become aware of it. Very often you've sent them forms and they want them to sign, and it's something I will get around to. Now you say to them, I need your form now. But what's interesting is then when they drive away from that boom, and they've just left their kids at home because they've gone to the shops, you can see in their faces the revelation that if we have a road closure, there will be one more structure between my home and the criminals. So if I leave my kids at home, before they can even get to my house, they've got to go through a boom which is being monitored. The chances are they're going to turn around. It's a game changer. It's about safety and security. It's about creating a community where you actually want to live, where you can feel safe at home and leave your kids at home, not have to worry about what's it going to look like when you get back. I listened to some of the crime that you guys are being exposed to at the moment. It's horrific. It's unbelievably bad. I'm going to mention one more thing, and then I'm going to open to questions. There is a provision in the Act to allow for an emergency road closure, which we did in a suburb called Lidwood Manor, Victoria. There's a court case about that. The court approved it. We've done it in a suburb called Globalfront. Those of you know where that is. That's on the north of Johannesburg. It's right next to a fast-growing squatter camp. And we did it in one other area, where we go to the city and we say the crime is so bad that we're asking permission to put the road closures up now. We had support from the CPF and from the police at the time, and the city did allow that. Listening to your crime, that's a possibility. I don't know that we'd get it right, but certainly something we could look at. And in the case of Globalfront, we went to the city, we meeting with them, and we said the crime is unbelievable. It's absolutely out of control. They said, we know all about the crime in Globalfront, and they gave us permission within a month to put the structures up. We then had to follow the process for the road closure, which we did, and was subsequently approved. But that is a possibility that what we could look at in terms of putting up a road closure for you. But in short, based on my experience, and I've seen the map of your area, I believe you could do a road closure. Exactly which roads could be closed, which ones not, I wouldn't be able to tell you, but a traffic engineer could. In terms of what those structures would look like, you have permanently closed gates, which can be opened in an emergency, but they don't have to be opened. Then there's certain roads which the city will say to the traffic engineer, will tell us which ones. These roads have to be open, for instance, during peak traffic to allow peak traffic to move in and out of the suburb. And then there's the booms which have to be open 24 hours a day. Remember that at every access point you have to have pedestrian access, because the city is very concerned that pedestrians mustn't be inconvenienced. The type of crime that you're trying to prevent is largely vehicle crime. So it's not pedestrians that are your main problem in the suburb, from what I've heard, is vehicles. So if you could keep track of the vehicles and making them come through find entrances. Other initiatives which have been amazing in Johannesburg is security companies now working together, very often with a company called Boomer Cam. I don't know if they're in your area, but they are sharing their video footage. So what's now happening, previously what would happen is there'd be a crime committed in an area where security company A operates. They would get the registration number and they would circulate it within their security company. That car would then go to another area which is a different security company. Commit a crime, they wouldn't be pre-warned because they didn't talk to each other. Now everyone's talking to each other. So you can actually track a vehicle committing a crime for road closures which have vehicle recognition plates, which is allowed. They pick it up when they come to your boom. They'll pick up if there's a vehicle that's been reported in the last hour or whatever as having committed a crime. It immediately alerts the security company. Vehicles can be sent, and they're catching criminals. So this initiative of everybody working together is definitely good. That's the kind of thing that you can look forward to if you go down this road. So I would encourage you. This is an initiative worth looking at. Just on a last comment, the little that I know about your road closure is you've already done the canvassing of people, subject to correction, and you already have this 2/3 support. That's amazing. That can take a very long time to get. So if you've got that, you are quite well advanced in terms of being able to submit the road closure application. I don't know if you've done a traffic impact study. I can't remember whether you have. If you haven't, you need to get one done. That can be done fairly quickly, not in the school holidays. I think it's still school holidays. My kids aren't at school anymore. But yes, you have to wait till the school holidays are over and then get that through. But it's you're well on your road to being able to achieve a road closure like we're talking about. What you need is a community support, and it's not just good enough to sign the letter to say I support it. You need to pay. There's going to be a cost, and you're all going to have to pay. And the more people that pay, the less it's going to cost per person. So, yeah, if I can encourage you, keep on the track that you're on. And for those who are not at the meeting today but are listening, please contribute. Become part of the committee that's trying to do this, because otherwise your committee is going to get exhausted. We have lots of road closures which are started by one person, usually because they've been the victim of a crime, and they're doing it 25 years later. We have road closures that are 25 years old, and it's still the same people, and eventually they burn out. So don't let that happen. You're a big community. You need to have committees. You need to have volunteers, people who are coming and supporting the guys that have organized this today, because this is a monumental task to do. I take my hat off to them for what they're achieving, for working with the CPF, working for the South African Police. It's a thankless task. It really is. And it needs lots of volunteers if you're going to make it work. So I'm encouraging you, carry on with what you're doing, participate, take part in it, make your contributions, and you can turn this neighborhood into something that's really highly desirable to live in, that you will work on. Do you have any questions? Yes. Okay. There's a number of them, but let me go to the non-profit company as a solution, because that's the best one that we've found. So we have designed it's called a Memorandum of Incorporation, which is basically your founding documents for the non-profit. And in terms, sorry, I'll just move this over. In terms of that, we have a membership application form. And if you own property in the area to be boomed, you're entitled to become a member. Once you agree to become a member, a few things kick in. Number one, you have the right to vote. And one of the things you vote on is the levy that's going to be charged every year. And that's decided at the annual general meeting. So it's like any company, it has directors, usually 3. The directors present a budget to the members to say, this is how much you're going to pay. You vote on that. So you can vote in favor of it or vote against it. You can have it changed. Once you become a member, you agree contractually to pay the levies. That's one of your duties as a member. So where you can't be forced to pay for the road closure, in terms of the city's regulations, if you become a member, then you can be forced to pay, because you've now signed and you're contractually bound to pay. So you can be sued if you don't pay. There's another clause that we add into that agreement, and that is to say that if you sell your property, you agree that you will ensure that the person who buys your property becomes a member. And until such time as they do, you remain liable for the levies. What that means is that you don't have a fall off. Somebody sells their property, someone buys, isn't told they have to pay, and then they get sold, they got to become a member. They are not going to be a member. You can't force anyone to become a member. That's the downside. But when you do your road closure, typically there's a lot of enthusiasm for it. And sadly, it's usually because there's been some horrific crimes, and everyone says, where do I sign? At that stage, you say, sign here, become a member. It's going to make your job as the committee running the road closure a whole lot easier when you can force people to pay. The reality is that you generally don't sue because it's not worth it, but the fact is that you can, so that people are more inclined to pay than they would otherwise. So that's the most effective way to get people to pay. If we do this for you, then I form the non-profit company. It's part of the cost. So there's no extra cost for you. You choose who the directors are. I don't. And you vote for them at the annual general meeting. So that's the one way. There are other ways which are not always as effective, but you get through the membership, you organize the discounts, for instance, with the insurance companies. You've got to be a member to get that discount. It's quite effective, because let's assume that your fee is 500 rands per month, and people, 500 rands a month is 500 bucks a month. Everybody's going through hard times. If you can get a discount, a mass discount through the security company, because the volume of houses, maybe, I mean, the one we're doing at the moment, security company was charging per house 750 Rand a month. They reduced that to 500 Rand. In fact, the one road closure that they're doing at the moment, they've put it out to tender. They've asked the security company to finance the construction phase. In that case, the construction phase is about 3 million rands. And they've got tenders from a security company, one that I know of, 7 tenders, I've only seen the one, in which that security company said, we'll finance it up front. And then everybody has to sign up with us for a period of 5 years, and we add, I think it's 200 rands per month to your bill, which is your contribution towards the capital cost of putting the structures up. So you get a reduction in your security fees, but remember, this only works if you work together. You can't expect a security company to give a reduction if they're not getting the numbers. So you've got to get the numbers, and that's dependent on you, not your committee. It's not the security company, it's dependent on you as a resident. That's another way that you can do it. With the insurance companies, you'll get a reduction in your insurance premiums. So while there's an amount that you have to pay, there's also a win situation where you become a member and now you're working as a community together and you're getting reductions on some other expenses. So that helps a little bit in terms of paying the 500 Rand. There is another piece of legislation which is in the pipeline at the moment in Johannesburg. I don't know if any of you are familiar with something called the CID, City Improvement District. Now, that was something that was introduced by the city of Gauteng legislation, which was designed to allow ratepayers in a particular area to increase the rates that were payable so that money could be used to uplift the area for beautification, for security. It was limited to city improvement districts, so in other words, city areas such as Johannesburg City Centre. That legislation was challenged at some stage in a court and fell apart, and the city is now looking for other options. And currently, the option they're looking at is copying a model from Cape Town. Now, that model effectively says that if you can get the support of 2/3 of the people in your area to have your area declared a special ratings area, SRA, then you present a budget to the city. You say to them, we need the following amounts for beautification, for safety and security, for fixing potholes, fixing streetlights, and the city considers your budget. If they're happy with your budget and they're happy that you got the necessary support, then they add that amount to everyone's rates bill. Everybody in the area, regardless of whether you agree to or not, has to pay. The city then collects the money and then they pay it across to you, and you can use that for, to pay for all sorts of things. At the moment, that legislation hasn't yet been passed. And in its draft form at the moment, because in fact, the legislation has been passed, the policy is what they're busy working on. And in terms of the policy, the city has specifically stated, we will not allow an SRA to be formed for the purposes of funding a road closure. That's a fight I'm going to be having with them at some stage in the future, but at the moment, it's not even been approved. If we get that right, that would be amazing, because the very same protocol that you need to follow to get a road closure, you follow for to get an SRA approved. So it would be really relatively easy. You go back to the same people who are already involved and say, sign this form to say you want an SRA, get the budget put together by the same directors that are running your road closure, and you present it to the city, and suddenly you've got a way of forcing people to pay. But we're not there yet, so that's not yet an option. But I'm involved in all of that. I'm working with something called the CID Forum. They're very involved in it, and I'm on the committee, not on the committee that represents, because I have a conflict of interest. Is they're working with the city to formulate that policy. I'm waiting for them to finalize the policy, at which stage I'm going to step in and say, I'm representing the road closure committee. Another fact, which I hadn't mentioned before, but that once you go on retainer with me, then with Suburban Solutions, you give me the power to negotiate on behalf of the road closure community. So we have, as I said, we've got about 150 road closures in total, not all of them on retainer, but some of them pay cash. But I can go to the city and say the road closure community has the following problems, and the city will listen to me. We've engaged with the ombudsman. We've engaged regularly with the city officials. We've engaged at a political level. At one stage, we engaged with the public protector very successfully. It was then Tuli Madonsela. Massive changes introduced by the city under pressure from the public protector. But I could do that because I could say I'm representing so many residents. I'm representing so many road closures. So there's a lot that we can do. If you get on board with us, then I'll be keeping you informed and telling you about all these initiatives. So there's power in community, there's power in working together, and it's one of the ways that you can utilize to get money. Does that answer your question?
So there's the setting up of the non-profit. It sounds like once somebody is a member, they're a member until they die, until they, so once people are in the that's right, right? Then it seems that really the to get people
to become members.
to get to become,
Yeah.
and then second, so it means that really
Yes.
fees from security companies, there's fine. And the other is from insurance companies. So are there any other monetary or other incentives that make people even want to sign up to become a member? So that with Humps and public at the time, the benefits of being a member far outweigh cost of being a member. So because I think if you said that.
Yeah. Mostly what I've said to you, but let me give you another example. There's one of the closures in Pretoria. Went to their residents and they got an estate agent to tell them your property price is going to increase. I can't remember what the figures were. I think it's 10% once you're living in a road closure. The average property price is X in that particular area. There they were asking for a contribution of 150,000 rands for the construction phase. I don't believe yours will be anywhere near that, but they were asking for that. And the incentive to the residents, they said you're going to pay 150,000 rands, but your 10% increase, because the average property price was 3 million rand, is 300,000 rand. Best money you could ever spend. You're doubling your money effectively, and they've got the buy-in from the residents. Different communities have different incentives. So you know your community better than I would. Other incentives. I tell you other things that have been tried and not necessarily succeeded. There have been areas that have allowed advertising because they have extensive fencing. So they allowed advertising and then they charged for the advertising. There have been areas that one of them had a park and they got a company to fund the machines in the park on the basis they could advertise the fact that they paid for it. So that also brought the cost down. So that's increasing the amenities in your suburb, which affects the resale value and the desirability of living there. There's a garage on the outskirts of one of the road closures that also made a contribution and received advertising from the residents. So these are the kind of things that you can do, which doesn't necessarily cost you, but gives you some sort of a benefit. Yes. Advertising became a problem because the cities had a problem with them putting advertising on the fencing because it wasn't in accordance with the advertising law. So it's another method that people use. Very often they use it. Naming and shaming. So for those who are not paying, they put it up on the board. Then you start running into problems with like the Poppy Act, and people threatening to sue. One of my road closures at the moment said, to tell you what we're going to do, we're not going to name and shame the people who haven't paid. What we will do is name the people who have paid with their permission. And then it's obvious who's not paying. So the people who are paying are going to go to the guys who are paying and say, I see your name's not on the board. Why am I paying for your security? So that can work. But yeah, it's a matter of trial and error. We're at the forefront of trying to find these solutions. We've tried a number of others which didn't work for various reasons, but we're constantly trying to find a way to make it cheaper for road closures to operate, to help them to get funding. And some of the methods work and some of them don't. At the moment, there's organizations that are fixing potholes. Probably aware of it. I've spoken to them as well. That can be another incentive to your residents association that you'll get the potholes fixed. So there are ways and means, but the primary ways of doing this is you've got to get people to realize that this is about safety and security. This is going to make my family safe. That's the best investment. I think if you come up with an idea, come talk to me. I'll tell you whether it's been tried before, and if it failed, why it failed. Because maybe it failed because those guys didn't do their job properly. You know, it's great to get community involvement from your residents, because that's the residents associations that work the best, the road closures, or where they speak to the residents, and the residents come up with ideas, and some of them work, and some of them I haven't thought of. You know, so make it a community initiative and look at those as alternatives. Sorry, I see there's some hands up to you.
Is the organization that things like six out debit orders and things like that? So that would be fine. Or should it should come from the individual where they can step a stockholder? How does it normally work?
It's like any other company. So you apply to form a company. When it's registered, then your directors go to the bank and they open a bank account in the name of that company. Most road closures then implement a debit order system so that you actually pay on a debit order, because otherwise you've got to harass people and phone them and people forget. It's painful. So there is a cost to a debit order system, but if you've got enough debit orders in place, then it's definitely worthwhile, and it gives a certainty of knowing how much you're going to receive. So that's typically how it works. Now, in a non-profit company, you can either have it audited or not in terms of the New Companies Act. Audited adds to your costs, because now you have to pay an auditor to present audited financial statements. Some residents associations prefer that, because a lot of people, when they give their 300 rands, believe that the directors are going to go and buy themselves a Ferrari with all this money that they've got. So they are reluctant to give unless they know that there's some sort of control. So then you pay the price and you get audited financial statements. Others are less relaxed and say, we trust each other, we're not worried about that. So in terms of the companies, the New Companies Act, you can have a non-profit company which doesn't have to have audited financial statements. Previously, with what was called the Section 21 company under the previous act, you had to have audited financial statements. So the new one gives you that much more flexibility to work it the way that you want to work. But yes, the debit order system would be the best way to do it.
Obviously, I think some of the questions that we've gone through the community, some of the questions that have come up. If we were to appoint a service provider like yourself, for instance, obviously we don't want to appoint somebody where at the end, the result that we desire as a community are not achieved. So we need to actually have a safe process in terms of getting guarantees that every step of the way, we are not actually just paying to get a result that say, you know, we have been declined, or this has not been approved, or that has not been approved. So if the community was to say, for instance, approve to say, you know what, we like what you said, and is there a service level agreement that then actually give the assurance to all the communities that are making the contribution that by appointing you, we're guaranteed that at the end, we will have the approval that we need, and we will be in a position to implement the booming system that we require.
First of all, there is an agreement that you sign. If you go with us, we have what is called, I'm a lawyer, we have what is called a retainer agreement, and that sets out what our obligations are and what yours are. Yours is to pay, ours is to process, submit a road closure application. Now, can I guarantee your road closure is going to be approved? No. No lawyer is ever going to guarantee you that, because there's factors that fall completely out of my control, which might impact on whether that road closure is approved or not. For instance, you don't get the 2/3 support. Or as we've had before, you get 2/3 support, and then at some stage during the process, some of the people withdraw their support, your road closure gets refused. So I can't guarantee you that. What I can tell you is every road closure application that we've done so far has been approved. Sometimes with conditions that people don't like. That's also out of our control. So for instance, road closures, some of them have automated systems and they want the residents to be given a remote so that they don't have to push the button or swipe their hand. They use the remote to drive through. That the city considers to be discriminatory and against the law. So they don't allow it. So we apply for that. I believe they're wrong, just as an aside. In fact, I know that they're wrong from a legal perspective, but the only way to win that is to go to court. And that costs a few $100,000. So most road closures live with the fact that they're not going to get remotes. So can I promise you you're going to get something like remotes? No. I can promise you that if we do this properly, If we get a traffic engineer's report, your application will be approved. And we've won every single one. And I have a reputation to protect, because with all the road closures I've done, I haven't had any refused. I don't want to lose it. I'm not going to throw away my reputation and tell you that you can do a road closure application, which I don't believe is going to succeed. And at this stage, from what I've seen, you can, but the big deciding factor is going to be a traffic impact study. Based on what I've seen of your roads, I don't see that that's going to be a problem. Does that answer your question? Yes. We don't have to use the one we use now. I mentioned earlier that I lived in White River at a certain stage, so I developed relationships there. And we actually use a traffic engineer who's from there. We use him, initially we used him because all the traffic engineers were too busy to do this. We also found out that he charges a lot less because he's based in Mpumalanga. So we tend to use him. We have a working relationship with him, a good working relationship with him, but we don't have to use him. You know, very often we come into an area and there is a traffic engineer living in the area. We're happy to work with any traffic. But certainly we can, you can recommend him and we can give you a quote from him. And he is typically cheaper than the local council.
Or if it's possible to do things like this, then so something saying then also
Yeah. Let's assume you do one application, which is cheaper than doing a whole lot of applications, because you pay an application fee for every application. So it's cheaper to do one application for the entire area and pay those costs. It also gets divided by more people. But in terms of the implementation, we're talking about the second phase. The city's policy is that within 4 months of them giving you final approval, you must erect your structures. So that's in theory. I do know that there are areas where they don't have enough money, so they don't do it all in one phase. And the city typically doesn't raise an eyebrow to it. So although in theory you're supposed to do it within 4 months, there are road closures that for practical reasons have done it over a period of time. Bearing in mind, of course, that it's the success in terms of what you're trying to achieve is limited if you have one road closed and all the other roads open. It's going to be less effective than all of it. But if that's a practical necessity that you have to do, then yes, it can be done. No, we haven't encountered that before, because we've got road closures, particularly, especially the bigger ones that take a long time. We've just done the road closure for Westlife. I don't know if any of you've been through that. We also did the construction phase, and that one started in 2018 because it was a very big area. We submitted the application in 2020. The decision was granted in 2021, and they're only starting to put their structures up now. And the city accepted the traffic impact study. You know, unless there's been some serious changes, typically traffic doesn't change that much. You do require a traffic impact study every 5 years, and that's because you could have had a block of flats built inside your area during that 5 years, which impacts on the amount of traffic moving in and out. In a big area like this, you probably need 10 blocks of flats to make a difference. But you do need one every 5 years, but typically, no. The traffic engineer's report doesn't have to be redone unless you wait 10 years. Then you need to do it. You have to consult with schools. Give you an example, Upper Westlife, which we just did. They have 3 schools in the area. They have an old age home. So we had to go and see the old age home. We had to go and see the schools, engage with them. And in fact, in the case of Westlife, there's 2 schools that are quite big. We had to go to the schools and say, this is what we're proposing. Schools then came and said, well, we actually have a problem with your opening and closing times of certain gates because our parents live on this side and they come through these gates, and we had to redo the traffic engineer's report based on that input. So yes, we have to engage with them. You don't, you need the support of 2/3. You don't need the support of everyone. But it's things like schools and big businesses, you need to get letters of support from them as well. And it doesn't make sense not to, because with the school especially, you have a lot of traffic coming in and out, and you've got to take that into consideration. Otherwise, you're setting yourself up for failure. Red running. Red running, basically. Yeah. Well, what the cameras do, because they put cameras up on all the intersections, it's going to pick up that traffic. And you can't use a road closure to stop rat running. Okay, so what would happen is that the traffic engineer would say, okay, so at certain times, there's a lot of traffic coming through the suburb from this, they're coming in this road and they're going out that road. It's likely that the traffic engineer will say that you need to keep that gate open for those peak traffic times to allow the traffic to run through. And then you can close the gates outside of the peak traffic times. What you're also entitled to do is to put in speed humps, which is not part of your road closure application, but it's quite effective. And what we found with most of our road closures is when you start putting speed humps in, people are disinclined to use those roads, and eventually they stop using it because it's damaging to their vehicles. And that's more effective. We could do that for you. That's in addition to the road closure, but yes, we could do that for you.